In this heartwarming and inspiring tale, Hollywood star Keanu Reeves stumbles upon a dog, Shadow, in dire condition on a beach in Key West. Covered in barnacle-like parasites and barely clinging to life, Shadow becomes the focus of a groundbreaking rescue effort led by Keanu and a dedicated team of scientists. Through determination, innovative science, and the unwavering bond between man and animal, Shadow survives against impossible odds. Over time, Shadow transforms into a therapy dog, inspiring trauma patients and people worldwide with his resilience and courage. His story becomes a global symbol of hope, proving that every life, no matter how small, is worth fighting for. Where are you watching from? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to DG Story for more amazing and heartfelt stories like this one. Together, let's celebrate the power of hope and resilience. The soft morning light filtered through the palm trees as the waves of Key West lapped rhythmically against the shore. Keanu Reeves, fresh off a grueling movie shoot, had retreated to the quiet coastal town for a well-deserved break. Known for his low-key demeanor and love for simplicity, he cherished the peace of his morning runs along the beach. As he jogged along the sand, Keanu noticed the usual signs of life: seagulls circling overhead, the distant hum of fishing boats. But something unusual caught his eye. Farther down the shoreline, a dark, misshapen figure lay at the edge of the water. He slowed to a stop, his brows furrowing in concern. The figure, barely discernible in the early morning mist, looked too still. Keanu approached cautiously, his heart sinking as the scene became clearer. It was a dog, at least what remained of one. The golden fur was matted with seaweed and dirt, and its body was covered in grotesque, barnacle-like growths. The creature's shallow, labored breaths were the only signs of life. Keanu knelt beside the dog, his movements careful and deliberate. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his deep voice tinged with concern. "What happened to you?" The dog stirred faintly, letting out a weak whimper. Keanu's chest tightened. He could see the pain in the dog's eyes, an unspoken plea for help. As he gently ran his hand over the creature's head, a small group of beachgoers began to gather, their whispers breaking the quiet of the morning. "Is that a dog?" one woman asked, her voice trembling. "It looks alien," another murmured, her phone raised to capture the scene. Keanu ignored the onlookers, his focus solely on the dog. The barnacle-like growths were embedded deep into its skin, cutting into the flesh with every small movement. The dog's body trembled with exhaustion, as though it had fought for far too long just to stay alive. "We need to help him," Keanu said, glancing at the crowd. "What can you even do?" a man asked skeptically. "That thing looks like it's already gone." Keanu's jaw tightened. "He's still breathing," he replied firmly. "That's enough for me." Without hesitation, Keanu carefully scooped the dog into his arms. Despite its frail condition, the weight of the barnacle-covered body was substantial. The dog let out a faint whimper, but Keanu murmured soothing words as he carried it toward his Jeep parked nearby. The drive to the nearest animal clinic was quiet except for the occasional sound of the dog's ragged breathing. Keanu kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting gently on the dog's side. "You're going to be okay," he said softly, as if reassuring both the dog and himself. "We'll get you some help." He pulled into the parking lot of the Key West Marine Rehabilitation Center, a facility he had read about during his time in town. Known for their work with injured marine animals, Keanu hoped they would have the resources needed for a case as dire as this. Inside, the staff reacted with shock as Keanu walked in, carrying the dog in his arms. "We've never seen anything like this," said Sophie Carter, the center's lead marine conservationist, as she examined the dog. "These aren't ordinary barnacles. They've embedded themselves deep into the tissue. Can you help him?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but urgent. Sophie hesitated, her eyes scanning the extent of the damage. "It won't be easy," This is unlike anything we've treated before. We'll need to run tests to understand how deep this goes. But she looked at Keanu and the dog with a mixture of determination and compassion. We'll try. Keanu nodded, a faint smile of gratitude crossing his face. That's all I ask. As the dog, now named Shadow by the staff, was prepared for initial tests, news of the discovery began to spread. One of the beachgoers had posted a video of Keanu carrying the barnacle-covered dog, and within hours, it went viral. Social media exploded with reactions. Keanu Reeves saves a dog? This man is the hero we don't deserve. That poor animal, can it even be saved? Why spend so much on a dog when there are bigger problems in the world? Unfazed by the growing media attention, Keanu stayed at the center, assisting however he could. He refused interviews and brushed off the idea of turning Shadow's story into a spectacle. For him, this wasn't about fame, it was about giving a helpless creature a second chance. As the sun set over Key West, Keanu sat outside the center, watching the waves roll in. Shadow rested in the observation room, his breathing steadier but still fragile. Keanu leaned back, staring at the horizon. "You've been through hell," he murmured to himself, "but you're still here. That's something worth fighting for." Inside the Key West Marine Rehabilitation Center, the quiet hum of machines monitoring Shadow's vitals filled the air. Keanu Reeves stood by the observation window, his arms crossed as he watched Sophie Carter and her team work on the frail, barnacle-covered dog. The sight of Shadow hooked up to monitors and 4 drips was sobering, a stark reminder of how close the dog had come to death. Dr. Alex Monroe, a young and ambitious marine biologist, entered the room holding a tablet with Shadow's initial test results. "We've got the scans back," he said, glancing at Keanu. Keanu turned, his expression calm but attentive. "How bad is it?" Alex hesitated, his usual confidence wavering. "It's complicated," he admitted, gesturing for Keanu to follow him into the lab. Sophie stood beside a digital screen displaying Shadow's X-rays and MRI scans. She pointed to clusters of dense, jagged shapes embedded deep into the dog's muscle tissue. "These aren't ordinary barnacles," Sophie explained, her voice tinged with concern. "They've fused with his skin and muscles, almost as if they're parasitic. Removing them will be like performing surgery on a body covered in broken glass." Keanu studied the scans, his brows furrowing. "What happens if you don't remove them?" Sophie sighed. "They'll continue to grow. They're cutting into his flesh with every movement, and they're already causing severe infections. If we don't act soon, it's only a matter of time before his organs fail." Keanu nodded slowly, processing the information. "And if you try to remove them?" Alex jumped in. "The removal process is risky. Each barnacle is deeply rooted, and tearing them off could cause significant trauma, blood loss, and even shock. Frankly," he paused, exchanging a glance with Sophie. "Frankly, it might be more humane to let him go." Keanu's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to the observation window, watching Shadow's chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Despite the dog's battered appearance, there was a quiet resilience in the way he clung to life. "No," Keanu said firmly, turning back to Alex and Sophie. "We're not giving up on him. There has to be another way." The team gathered in the center's conference room later that evening. The situation had sparked heated debate among the staff, some of whom were skeptical about the resources being devoted to a single animal. "This dog has been through enough," one technician argued. "Why put him through more pain just to extend his suffering?" "But he's still fighting," Sophie countered. "We've seen animals recover from worse. If there's a chance, any chance, we owe it to him to try." Alex sighed, rubbing his temples. "Even if we proceed, we're venturing into uncharted territory. The tools we use for marine animals might not work on a dog. And if his body can't handle the stress..." Keanu, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Look, I understand the risks, but this isn't just about Shadow. It's about proving that every life is worth fighting for. If we succeed, we're not just saving him, we're setting a precedent for how we treat cases like this in the future. His words hung in the air, a quiet challenge to everyone in the room. Sophie nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we'll start by stabilizing him. We'll control the infections, manage his pain, and buy ourselves some time to figure out a solution. Alex looked unconvinced but relented. All right, let's do it. The next day, Sophie and Alex began the painstaking process of cleaning Shadow's wounds. The barnacle-like growths were razor-sharp, their jagged edges cutting into the surrounding skin with even the slightest movement. As Sophie worked, Keanu sat nearby, his presence a quiet reassurance to both the team and Shadow. When the dog whimpered, Keanu knelt beside the table, gently stroking his head. "You're doing great, buddy," he murmured. "Just hang in there." The treatment took hours, and by the end, everyone was physically and emotionally drained. But Shadow's condition had stabilized, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, the video of Keanu carrying Shadow into the center continued to gain traction online. News outlets picked up the story, and the public's reaction was divided. Keanu Reeves saves a dog's life? This man is a real-life hero. This poor dog deserves every chance to survive. Keep fighting. Shadow, why spend so much money and time on one dog? There are bigger problems in the world. Keanu brushed off the attention, refusing interviews and redirecting donations to the center's work. For him, the focus was clear: Shadow's survival. Late one night, as Sophie reviewed Shadow's latest test results, an email arrived in her inbox. It was from Dr. Ethan Pierce, a renowned parasitologist who had seen Shadow's story online. The subject line read, "I have an idea." Sophie's eyes widened as she read the email. Pierce proposed using a synthetic enzyme he had developed to trigger the detachment of parasitic organisms. Though untested on mammals, it offered a potential breakthrough. "This could work," Sophie said aloud, excitement and apprehension battling in her voice. Keanu, sitting nearby, looked up. "What is it?" Sophie explained the idea, her tone cautious but hopeful. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot at removing the barnacles without tearing Shadow apart." Keanu's gaze shifted to the observation room, where Shadow lay sleeping. He nodded. "Then let's do it, whatever it takes." The following morning, Sophie reached out to Dr. Ethan Pierce, the parasitologist whose email had sparked a glimmer of hope. Within hours, they arranged a video call to discuss the experimental enzyme that Pierce believed could save Shadow. Dr. Pierce's face appeared on the screen, a mix of weariness and excitement evident in his features. "First of all, I've been following Shadow's story," he began. "What you're doing is incredible. I believe I can help." He outlined his proposal, explaining how the synthetic enzyme mimicked the natural detachment signals used by marine parasites during seasonal migration. "If we introduce this enzyme into Shadow's system," he said, "it should trigger the barnacle-like organisms to release their grip voluntarily. It's less invasive than surgical removal, but there are risks." "What kind of risks?" Keanu asked, leaning forward in his chair. Pierce's expression turned serious. "This enzyme has never been tested on a mammal. The organisms might detach too quickly, causing internal bleeding or shock, and there's always the chance of an allergic reaction." Sophie nodded, absorbing the information. "But if it works, it could save his life." Pierce hesitated. "Yes, but you'll need to monitor him closely, minute by minute. The enzyme must be administered in precise doses over several hours. One mistake could overwhelm his system." Keanu's voice was calm but resolute. "We'll do whatever it takes. Shadow deserves this chance." Over the next 2 days, the team at the Key West Marine Rehabilitation Center prepared for the delicate procedure. Dr. Pierce flew in with the enzyme and spent hours briefing Sophie, Alex, and the rest of the staff on how to administer it. "This has to be a team effort," Pierce emphasized during their final meeting. "If anything goes wrong, Everyone needs to be ready to respond immediately. Keanu volunteered to stay by Shadow's side throughout the procedure. I'll be there to keep him calm, he said. He knows I'm on his side. Alex was skeptical. This isn't a movie, Keanu. If something goes wrong, your presence won't be enough to save him. Keanu met Alex's gaze with quiet determination. I'm not here to play the hero, he said. I'm here to give him a fighting chance. That's all. Alex didn't respond, but Sophie shot Keanu a grateful smile. The morning of the procedure, Shadow was moved to the center's sterile operating room. He was sedated lightly to keep him calm, but his vitals remained stable. As Dr. Pierce prepared the first dose of enzyme, Sophie stood by, double-checking the monitors. Keanu knelt beside Shadow, stroking his head and whispering words of encouragement. You're stronger than you know, he murmured. Just hold on, buddy. The first dose was administered through in 4, and everyone watched anxiously as the enzyme began to circulate through Shadow's system. First, nothing happened. Then, under the microscope, Sophie noticed a faint movement. The barnacle-like organisms began to loosen their grip. It's working, she whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. Dr. Pierce nodded, his focus unwavering. This is just the beginning. Keep monitoring his vitals. For the first 2 hours, the procedure went smoothly. The smaller clusters of parasites detached with minimal bleeding, leaving raw but manageable wounds. Then, as the team moved to the larger clusters along Shadow's spine, the dog's heart rate spiked. The monitors blared warnings, and Shadow's breathing grew labored. He's going into shock, Alex shouted, rushing to adjust the flow. Dr. Pierce's hands trembled as he checked the dosage calculations. The larger clusters are releasing too quickly. His body can't handle the stress. Keanu stood up, his voice calm but firm. What can I do? Talk to him, Sophie said, her own voice shaking. Keep him grounded. Let him know he's not alone. Keanu knelt beside Shadow, his hand resting gently on the dog's side. Shadow, listen to me, he said softly. You're not giving up. Okay, not now. Not after everything you've been through. Stay with us. As if responding to Keanu's voice, Shadow let out a faint whimper. His heart rate began to stabilize, though his breathing remained shallow. We're not out of the woods yet, Dr. Pierce warned. We have to move carefully from here. Over the next few hours, the team worked in tense silence, administering the enzyme in precise increments. Each dose brought new challenges as the larger parasites fought to maintain their grip. At one point, Shadow let out a pained cry, his body trembling as the enzyme took effect. Keanu clenched his jaw, his hand never leaving Shadow's side. You're almost there, he whispered. Just a little longer. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the last of the parasites detached. Shadow lay still on the table, his body free of the barnacle-like growths for the first time in months. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the monitors. Then Sophie let out a shaky breath. We did it, she said, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Pierce inspected the wounds, nodding in satisfaction. He's not out of danger yet, but this is a good start. As news of the procedure spread, social media lit up with reactions. Shadow's survival is a miracle. Thank you, Keanu, for not giving up on him. This is groundbreaking science. Imagine how many animals this could help. All this for one dog? What about humans who need help? Keanu, as always, stayed out of the spotlight. For him, the victory wasn't about public approval, it was about Shadow. As the team wheeled Shadow into the recovery room, Keanu walked beside him, his hand resting gently on the dog's side. You're a fighter, Shadow, he said quietly. We're not done yet. Shadow's body was free of the barnacle-like parasites, but his fight was far from over. The procedure had left him weak and vulnerable, with raw wounds that required constant care. The next 48 hours would be critical. Any infection or organ failure could undo all the progress the team had made. Keanu sat in the recovery room beside Shadow, who lay motionless on a padded bed. His breathing was shallow, and his body trembled faintly, a combination of exhaustion and trauma. "Vitals are stable," Sophie said as she checked the monitors. "But his immune system is severely compromised. If we don't keep those wounds clean and prevent infection, he won't make it." Dr. Pierce nodded in agreement. "We'll need to start him on a cocktail of antibiotics immediately, and his hydration levels need to be carefully monitored." Keanu glanced at Shadow, his jaw tightening. "Tell me what I can do," he said simply. Sophie smiled faintly. "Just being here helps. He seems to respond to you." The team worked around the clock, taking turns monitoring Shadow's condition. Keanu refused to leave his side, sleeping in short intervals on a cot in the corner of the room. In the quiet hours of the night, Keanu often found himself talking to Shadow, his deep voice filling the room. "You're a tough one. You know that?" he said one evening, his hand resting gently on Shadow's head. "Most people wouldn't have made it through what you've been through, but you're still here. That's something." Shadow let out a soft whimper, his tail giving the faintest of wags. Keanu chuckled, a rare smile crossing his face. "There it is. That's what I like to see." 2 days after the procedure, Shadow's condition took a sudden turn. His temperature spiked, and his breathing grew erratic. "Sepsis," Alex said grimly as he examined Shadow's blood work. "The infections are spreading faster than we anticipated." Sophie's hands shook as she adjusted Shadow's fore. "We need to stabilize him. If we lose him now..." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Keanu stood at the edge of the room, his fists clenched. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice steady but urgent. Dr. Pierce looked up from his notes. "We need to increase the antibiotic dosage, but it's a fine line. Too much, and his kidneys could fail. Too little, and the infection will win." Keanu took a deep breath. "Then we walk the line. Whatever it takes. We keep him alive." For hours, the team fought to stabilize Shadow, adjusting medications and monitoring his vitals with painstaking precision. At one point, Shadow let out a low, pained cry, his body shuddering under the strain. Keanu knelt beside him, his hand resting on the dog's side. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I know it hurts, but you've come too far to give up now. Just keep fighting a little longer, okay?" As if hearing his words, Shadow's breathing began to even out. The monitors showed a slight improvement in his heart rate, and Sophie let out a sigh of relief. "He's stabilizing," she said, her voice trembling. Alex glanced at Keanu. "I don't know how, but he seems to respond to you. It's like he knows you're here for him." Keanu nodded, his gaze never leaving Shadow. "He's not alone. That makes a difference." Meanwhile, the world outside the rehabilitation center buzzed with updates about Shadow's recovery. News outlets and social media platforms were flooded with both praise and criticism. "This dog story is incredible. Keanu Reeves is a real-life hero. Why all this attention on one dog? There are so many animals and people who need help." Shadow's survival is a testament to what's possible when compassion and science come together. Keanu ignored the noise, his focus solely on Shadow. When reporters showed up outside the center, he declined interviews, redirecting their attention to the team and their groundbreaking work. "This isn't about me," he told one journalist who managed to catch him outside. "It's about Shadow and what his story means for all of us." On the third day after the procedure, Shadow showed his first real sign of improvement. As Sophie entered the recovery room, she noticed a faint movement. Shadow was trying to lift his head. "Keanu," she called, her voice filled with excitement. Keanu rushed into the room just in time to see Shadow's eyes open slightly. The dog let out a low whimper and made a feeble attempt to wag his tail. "Hey, buddy," Keanu said, kneeling beside him. "Look at you. You're a fighter, aren't you?" Sophie checked the monitors, her face breaking into a smile. "His vitals are improving. The antibiotics are working." For the first time in days, the room was filled with cautious optimism. That evening, Keanu sat beside Shadow as the dog drifted off into a peaceful sleep. The weight of the past few days pressed heavily on him, but for the first time, he felt a sense of relief. "You've got a long way to go," Keanu said quietly, "but you're not doing it alone. We're in this together." As the sun set over Key West, casting the room in a warm golden light, Shadow's steady breathing filled the air. A quiet reminder that even the smallest victories can feel monumental. The days following Shadow's stabilization marked the beginning of a long and uncertain recovery. Though the barnacle-like parasites had been successfully removed, their damage lingered in the form of raw wounds, muscle atrophy, and internal strain. Each step forward felt tenuous, but it was progress nonetheless. Shadow's rehabilitation plan revolved around a delicate balance of rest and activity. Hydrotherapy became a cornerstone of his recovery, allowing him to rebuild strength without putting too much pressure on his injured body. The first session took place in a small, temperature-controlled pool in the lab's therapy wing. Keanu knelt beside Shadow as Sophie and Alex prepared to ease him into the water. He might resist at first, Sophie warned. Most animals are nervous about water when they're injured. Keanu gave a small smile, his hand resting on Shadow's head. "Let's see what he does. I've got a feeling about this guy." As they gently lowered Shadow into the pool, the dog let out a low whine but didn't thrash. His paws dipped into the warm water, and for a moment, he seemed frozen. Then, slowly, he began to paddle, his movements weak but deliberate. "That's it, buddy," Keanu encouraged, walking alongside the edge of the pool. "You've got this." Sophie watched in awe. "He's responding so well. Most dogs take days to adjust." Keanu chuckled softly. "Shadow's not most dogs." Despite the promising start, Shadow's recovery wasn't without its challenges. Some days, his energy would plummet, and he'd refuse to eat, his body too exhausted to process even small meals. One particularly difficult evening, Shadow lay curled on his recovery bed, his head resting on his paws. Keanu sat beside him, a bowl of food in hand. "You've got to eat something, pal," Keanu said softly. "I know it's hard, but you need your strength." Shadow let out a faint whimper but didn't move. Sophie entered the room, her face lined with concern. "He's hit a plateau. It happens during recovery, but it's tough to watch." Keanu glanced at her, determination etched into his features. "We'll get through it. He's stronger than he looks." The next day, Shadow seemed to sense their patience. He managed to eat a small meal, his tail wagging faintly as Keanu praised him. "That's my boy," Keanu said, his voice filled with pride. As Shadow regained his strength, his bond with Keanu deepened. The dog, who had once been too weak to lift his head, now followed Keanu's every movement with alert eyes. One afternoon, during a routine therapy session, Shadow surprised everyone by standing on his own for the first time. "Keanu, look!" Sophie exclaimed, pointing to the dog. Keanu turned just in time to see Shadow, his legs trembling but holding steady. His tail wagged slowly, his expression almost proud. Keanu knelt down, his face lighting up with a rare smile. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Alex, who had been skeptical throughout much of the process, couldn't help but grin. "He's got a lot of fight in him. I'll give him that." Outside the lab, Shadow's story continued to captivate the world. News outlets ran stories about his recovery, and social media buzzed with updates and photos. One video, posted by Sophie, showed Shadow taking his first unassisted steps. The caption read, "From survivor to fighter, Shadow's journey isn't over yet. Thank you to everyone who supported him along the way." The post quickly went viral, sparking an outpouring of support. "I've been following Shadow's story since the beginning. This is incredible. This dog is the definition of resilience. Keep going. Shadow, Keanu Reeves is a hero, not just on screen but in real life." Donations flooded into the Key West Marine Rehabilitation Center, allowing them to expand their resources and help more animals in need. Weeks turned into months, And Shadow's progress was nothing short of remarkable. His golden coat, once matted and dull, began to grow back in glossy patches. His strength improved daily, and he eagerly participated in his therapy sessions. One evening, as the sun set over Key West, Keanu took Shadow for his first walk along the beach. The dog moved cautiously at first, his paws sinking into the sand. But as the waves lapped at the shore, Shadow's confidence grew. He broke into a slow trot, his tail wagging as he sniffed the salty air. Sophie watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. "He's a completely different dog," she said softly. Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on Shadow. "He's more than that. He's proof that even when life beats you down, you can still get back up." That night, as Keanu sat beside Shadow in the recovery room, he reflected on their journey. "I've been in my share of tough spots," he said quietly, stroking the dog's head. "But you've taught me something. You've shown me what it means to fight for every breath." Shadow let out a soft huff, resting his head on Keanu's lap. Keanu smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Yeah, buddy, we're not done yet." Shadow's recovery wasn't just a physical transformation. It was a testament to resilience and the unbreakable bond between man and animal. As the weeks turned into months, the once frail, barnacle-covered dog grew into a beacon of hope for everyone who crossed his path. By now, Shadow was strong enough to join Keanu on short trips into town. Each outing brought smiles and whispers from locals and tourists alike. People stopped to greet him, offering treats and kind words. "Is that Shadow?" a young boy asked one afternoon, his eyes wide with wonder. Keanu knelt beside the boy, his hand resting on Shadow's head. "It is," he said with a gentle smile. The boy hesitated before reaching out to pet Shadow's golden fur. "He's so brave," he said. "I wish I could be brave like him." Keanu's gaze softened. "You can be. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going, no matter what." The boy nodded, his small hand resting gently on Shadow's back. "Thank you," he whispered before running back to his parents. Sophie watched the exchange from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. Shadow had become more than a survivor. He was a symbol of strength and courage, inspiring people of all ages. One day, Sophie approached Keanu with an idea. "I've been thinking," she began. "Shadow's presence has such a calming effect on people. Have you considered training him as a therapy dog?" Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Therapy dog?" Sophie nodded. "There's a rehabilitation center in town that works with trauma patients. They've heard about Shadow and think he could make a real difference." Keanu glanced at Shadow, who was lying at his feet, his tail wagging gently. "He's been through so much," he said. "Do you think he's ready for something like that?" "I do," Sophie replied. "He's already helping people without even trying. This could give his journey a whole new purpose." After a moment's thought, Keanu nodded. "All right, let's give it a shot." The following week, Shadow had his first session at the Key West Rehabilitation Center. Keanu walked him into the building, where patients and staff alike greeted him with warm smiles. One of the first patients Shadow met was a woman named Margaret, who had suffered severe injuries in a car accident. She sat in her wheelchair, her face etched with pain and sadness. As Shadow approached, Margaret hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. Keanu knelt beside her, speaking in his calm, reassuring tone. "Shadow's here for you," he said. "He knows what it's like to fight through tough times." Margaret reached out cautiously, her fingers brushing against Shadow's fur. The dog stood still, his eyes gentle and understanding. For the first time in weeks, Margaret smiled. "He's amazing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu nodded. "He is, and so are you." During another visit, Shadow met a boy named Jake, who had lost his leg in an accident. Jake had been withdrawn and unresponsive for weeks, struggling to adjust to his prosthetic limb. When Shadow trotted over, Jake's eyes lit up with curiosity. "What happened to him?" he asked. Keanu smiled. sitting down beside the boy. "He went through something really tough," he explained, "but he didn't give up, and now he's stronger than ever." Jake hesitated before petting Shadow. "I feel like giving up sometimes," he admitted. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay to feel that way," he said, "but every step forward, no matter how small, makes you stronger." Shadow's proof of that. Jake smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the dog. "Do you think I can be strong like him?" "You already are," Keanu replied. As the weeks passed, Shadow became a regular presence at the rehabilitation center. Patients eagerly awaited his visits, their spirits lifted by his gentle demeanor and wagging tail. "He's a natural," Sophie said during one of their check-ins. "It's like he was meant for this." Keanu nodded, watching Shadow interact with a group of children in the outdoor therapy area. "He's found his purpose," he said, "and maybe, so have I." Shadow's story continued to inspire people far beyond Key West. News outlets featured updates on his recovery and new role as a therapy dog, and donations poured in to support the rehabilitation center and the Key West Marine Lab. One letter, sent from a young girl in Texas, read, "Dear Shadow, I saw your story on TV. I was really scared to try out for my soccer team because I thought I wasn't good enough. But then I thought about you, and I decided to be brave. Thank you for helping me." Keanu read the letter aloud to Shadow one evening, his voice tinged with emotion. "You've touched more lives than you'll ever know, buddy," he said, stroking the dog's head. One evening, as the sun set over the beach, Keanu and Shadow walked along the shore. The waves lapped gently at their feet, and the horizon glowed with hues of orange and pink. For the first time since his rescue, Shadow broke into a run, his golden fur gleaming in the fading sunlight. Keanu watched with a mixture of awe and pride, his heart swelling at the sight. "You're free now," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the sound of the waves. "And you've shown all of us what freedom really means." Shadow's transformation was complete, but his story was far from over. What began as a desperate rescue had grown into a movement, a testament to hope, resilience, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. Shadow had become more than a survivor. He was a symbol, a teacher, and an ambassador of kindness. Word of Shadow's story continued to spread, reaching audiences far beyond Key West. Sophie, Alex, and Dr. Pierce were inundated with inquiries from scientists, veterinarians, and animal welfare organizations eager to learn from their groundbreaking work. Dr. Pierce's enzyme treatment was officially named the Shadow Protocol, and its applications quickly expanded. Rehabilitation centers for marine animals began using the technique on turtles, seals, and even whales affected by parasites. At an international marine biology conference, Sophie stood before a packed auditorium, sharing the details of Shadow's case. Photos of his journey, from the barnacle-covered dog on the beach to the proud therapy dog he had become, flashed on the screen behind her. "Shadow's story is a reminder," Sophie said, her voice steady and confident, "that even in the darkest moments, there is a way forward. Science and compassion can work together to create miracles." The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation for the dog who had inspired it all. Back in Key West, Shadow continued his weekly visits to the rehabilitation center. Patients who once faced their own battles with despair found comfort in his presence. One day, a veteran named Michael, who had lost his leg in combat, met Shadow for the first time. At first, Michael was hesitant, his stoic demeanor hiding the pain he carried. "He's seen some battles, hasn't he?" Michael said, gesturing toward Shadow's scars. Keanu, who had accompanied Shadow, nodded. "Yeah, but he didn't let them break him. Neither should you." Michael chuckled softly, reaching down to scratch behind Shadow's ears. "Maybe I'll take a page out of his book," he said. Keanu smiled, his gaze shifting between Michael and Shadow. "You've got more in common with him than you think." Shadow's role as an ambassador of resilience expanded further, when he and Keanu were invited to speak at local schools. Children who had followed Shadow's story online were eager to meet the dog whose courage had inspired them. In one classroom, Keanu stood in front of a group of wide-eyed students, Shadow sitting calmly at his side. "Who here has ever felt like giving up?" Keanu asked. Several hands shot up, and a few children looked down, embarrassed. "That's okay," Keanu said, his tone warm and reassuring. Shadow felt that way, too, but he kept going. Even when it was hard, even when it hurt, he didn't give up. And now look at him. The children clapped as Shadow wagged his tail, his golden fur gleaming under the classroom lights. One little girl raised her hand. "Does Shadow have superpowers?" she asked. Keanu chuckled. "Not the kind you see in movies, but he does have something even better, heart. And that's something we all have, too." 1 year after Shadow's rescue, Keanu and Sophie were invited to a ceremony in Washington, D.C., where Shadow was honored with an award for his contributions as a therapy dog and ambassador for resilience. Standing on stage, Keanu spoke to the crowd, Shadow sitting proudly beside him. "Shadow's story isn't just about survival," Keanu said. "It's about what happens when we refuse to give up, when we come together to help those who can't help themselves. He's taught me, and I hope all of us, that no life is too small to matter." The audience gave a standing ovation, and Shadow barked softly, as if acknowledging the applause. After the ceremony, Keanu and Shadow returned to Key West, their lives settling back into a peaceful rhythm. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they walked along the same stretch of beach where Shadow had been found. Keanu stopped and knelt beside Shadow, his hand resting on the dog's head. "You've come a long way, buddy," he said quietly, "and you've taken all of us with you." Shadow wagged his tail, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. The two sat together, watching the waves roll in, the warmth of the setting sun casting them in golden light. In that moment, there was no need for words, just the unspoken bond between a man and the dog who had defied the odds. Shadow's story continued to inspire. His impact felt far and wide. Schools used his journey to teach lessons on resilience and compassion. Rehabilitation centers across the country adopted therapy programs modeled after his success. At the Key West Marine Rehabilitation Center, a plaque was installed in Shadow's honor. It read, "In tribute to Shadow, a survivor, a teacher, a symbol of hope." Keanu often visited the center with Shadow, spending quiet afternoons with the staff and animals. Each visit was a reminder of how far they had come, and how much Shadow's story had changed the world. Years later, Shadow's journey remained a symbol of what was possible when determination and compassion came together. Children read books about his story. Researchers expanded on the breakthroughs his case had inspired, and people facing their own struggles found strength in his example. For Keanu, Shadow was more than a dog. He was a friend, partner, and a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that changed the world. As they walked along the beach one last time, Keanu looked down at Shadow, his heart full. "You've done good, buddy," he said softly. "You've done more than anyone could have imagined." And as Shadow wagged his tail, the waves whispered their approval, carrying his legacy far beyond the shores of Key West.